In every competition, there is a number 1 and a number 2, a winner and a loser. For example, in Little Cup Premier League 11, which was won by the Skitty Committee, no matter how hard the Rem Raiders tried, they did not win. They were number 2. And as much as they would like to change that, they can't. The reason why I'm bringing this up is that in Little Cup, with the viability rankings, we even have this sort of dichotomy. And the reason for that is that number 1 is Girafarig, and the number 2 is Pawniard every single time. Throughout the generations, ever since Generation 5, it's always been exceedingly good, but it's never been on top. Why is that, and what makes Pawniard the eternal number 2? I'm the Shoddy Strawman. If you could like, share, and subscribe, I'd very much appreciate it. But now, let's get into the content. So first and foremost, what makes Pawniard good? You got 45 base attack, 85 base attack, 45 base HP, I should say, I'm sorry. 85 base attack, 70 base defense, 60 base speed, and 40 base special defense. This is all a pretty good stat line. For context, Girafarig, which is the tier king, has lower attack and lower defense. You're better than Girafarig at being a physical attacker. It's pretty crazy. Your HP of 45 and your special defense of 40, they're not fantastic, but they're workable, especially because Steel has so many resistances, and it's borderline the best type that you don't really care too much about your special defense being low, because you can just take so many hits anyway. Plus your 16 speed, if you go to 16 speed, it works out pretty nicely, and outspeeding a lot of common Pokemon, meaning that you're a bit hard to be able to deal with effectively. Now, what moves do you want to run? So, you can run stuff like Iron Head, which is an 80 base power stab move, which has a 30% chance to make the target flinch. It's just good stab to use. You have Brick Break for other Pawniard, as well as Dark types, as well as Steel types, such as Magnemite. You have Sucker Punch, and that's for a lot of stuff, because it's a priority move, which fails if the target's not attacking, but it's the strongest priority move that we currently have. 70 base power usually goes first, and because it's Dark type, you have Stab, which is a 1.5 times boost on it, meaning that it's exceedingly powerful, especially coming off of your base 85 attack stat. Excuse me. Next up, we have Stealth Rock, and Stealth Rock hurts foes on switch-in, which can be exceedingly valuable over the course of the game, because a lot of the ways that you can deal with things is just, well, I switch out to my counter. If I want to be able to deal with this Girafarig, well, then I can just switch into my Pawniard. It doesn't matter, because I can take the Psychic-type moves that Girafarig wants to send out with my Pawniard, which is a Dark-type, which is immune to them. And you can punish the switches pretty well, as well as limit fire types that would otherwise really endanger Pawniard. So that's all pretty nice. Next up, we have the ability of Defiant, which means that your attack is raised by 2 stages for each stat that is lowered by a foe. And that's exceedingly important for certain matchups coming up, but also some attacks just have this off chance to lower some stats. If we look at Girafarig, if we go to the physical attacker set of it, it's got Crunch, and that can lower your defense by 1. And if you can take that exceedingly well, because A, it's a Dark type move, and B, it's physical, and you have really good physical defense. So, if you take that and then you get the boost, then you have a lot of progress and are extremely threatening, especially with Sucker Punch, without having to do much and just being passive with it. Really nice. But that's not the only set that you can run. You can also run a more sweeping set, as well as a variety of support moves. You have stuff like Thunder Wave, which paralyzes your opponent, which halves their speed and gives them a 25% chance to not move, which is always a really nice status to apply on your opponent. You also have Swords Dance, which raises your attack by 2 stages, which means that your 85 base attack gets super boosted, meaning that your Sucker Punches can be even more dangerous. You also really appreciate having some Terra types. For example, on this Pawniard, Terra type Ghost. The reason why you like that is for 2 reasons. A, Dark Steel has a quadruple fighting weakness, and to avoid fighting type moves, you switch to Ghost, which is immune to them, as well as block Rapid Spin, which can keep hazards up, such as Stealth Rock. And on this set, you're running Terra type Flying, and that's so that way you resist fighting as opposed to having an immunity. That's fine though, you have enough bulk to take it. In addition, you are no longer trapped by Diglett, and you have a ground immunity, meaning that you can check it kind of well as a result. Pretty cool. But that's not the only sets that you can run. You can run these sort of Eviolite sets to make yourself really bulky. However, you can also run a Scarf set, and Choice Scarf boosts your speed by 1.5 times, and because you have 16 base speed, you're actually really effective at it. And you can run stuff like Night Slash, Iron Head, Brick Break. You even run Sucker Punch, and the reason for that is that if your opponent is also using a priority move, such as Aqua Jet or their own Sucker Punch, if you are faster and you click Sucker Punch, that means that yours comes out and your opponent's doesn't. That's an important distinction to make, and having it on a Scarf set is surprisingly useful for revenge killing, even if your opponent's going for priority moves. There's also some times where you're not faster than the opponent, and that can be a bit annoying, but if you have Sucker Punch, it's manageable. The reason why 16 speed is so valuable for a Scarfer is that first, there's a lot of very fast mons. For example, Diglett, it gets up to 20 base speed. So if you want to have an effective Scarfer, you have to outpace this, meaning that you have to get at least 14. You have 16 on your Pawniard, which is exceedingly good, because that means not only do you outpace Diglett, but you also outpace other Scarfers. For example, Magnemite, it gets up to 15. It's still a good Scarfer, but you get to outpace it, meaning that even if your opponent has a choice Scarfer that's supposed to be their speed control, go really fast, so that way you don't get momentum, well, you can just take it right back because yours is faster. Doesn't really matter. You also deal with things that are normally faster than you without a Scarf, such as Girafarig. Being able to Night Slash into this before it can get an attack off is always really nice. But what makes it so that way it's only number 2 as opposed to number 1? This is a lot of really good things. So, what makes this bad? Well, for that we have to look back at the previous generation. And the reason for that is that you have a very different moveset. So if you go to the recommended sets, Berry Juice set has Knockoff. And Knockoff is far and away the best move in Little Cup, because you remove the best item in the entirety of Little Cup, which is Eviolite, which boosts your defense and special defense by 1.5 times. So being able to knock things off, exceedingly good. And especially when it's coming off of your stab dark moves with a base attack set of 85, you're going to be hitting really hard and your opponent has a hard time switching into it. You also have like some other stuff. Like you have other moves that you can run. You have like the Isle of Armor moves. You have Psycho Cut. You have Rock Polish, so that way you can be a sweeper. You have Steel Beam, which was used on some hyper offense sets. So if I remember the set correctly, what you could do is that you would have Focus Sash, and then you would have Inner Focus, and then you have Steel Beam, Stealth Rock. You could run Taunt if you wanted to. Steel Beam, Stealth Rock, Taunt. And then also, like, the fourth move was kind of operable because you could do, like, Rock Polish. You could also do Knock here. But you had a lot of flexibility because of all these moves that you had, as well as some pretty alright abilities. And you could even run a King's Rock Rock Polish beat-up set, which Freeze did in Little Cup Championships, which was really funny to watch. But just having less in your move pool always makes it... Well, typically makes it that you're less effective overall, but having knockoff's the really, really big one. And it's really hard to function without the knockoff. Another thing that really hurts is that if you saw on this, it's the Berry Juice set. Well, why do you want to use Berry Juice over Eviolite? Because Eviolite boosts your defense, so why wouldn't you want to use that? The answer to that is there is Natu. That was also in Generation 8. It was really good as well. And you really like switching into it because it's a Psychic type. You can hit it really hard. However, it has Heat Wave. And Heat Wave was a 2-hit KO if you had Eviolite. But if you have Berry Juice, which this Pawniard does have, then you could take it, be able to get back up to full health, and then take another hit. Meaning that instead of being a 2-hit KO, it was a 3-hit KO. And that meant that Natu couldn't stay in. If it was a 2-hit KO, then there was a guessing game between, oh, well, on my Pawniard, do I want to click Knockoff so that way I can hit the Natu really hard? Or do I want to hit Sucker Punch so that way I'm not slower than it, I can hit it beforehand? Or it can also just switch into another Mon, at which point I'm just kind of stuck. But if I'm at full health, then that means that Knockoff becomes significantly more reliable as an option. It's like, okay, well, I can just take the hit and remove the Natu. It's all okay. I don't mind. So not having Berry Juice means that your defensive ability is a little bit skewed. What else is making it really hard for Pawniard to be number 1? And the simple answer is the current number 1, which is Girafarig. It's got way too many sets. It's got Nasty plus Special Attacker. It's got Physical Attacker. It's got Physical or Special Wish Protect, because it can run either if you want to run, like, Twin Beam, and then something like... Well, you could, like, run, like, Low Kick. You could run... Don't you get Dazzling Gleam? Yeah, you get Dazzling Gleam. Stuff like that. You can do a whole bunch of different tech just to make Girafarig work. And it's really hard to check reliably as a result. And you can even do a Rest Calm Mindset. And that could be kind of hard to deal with. And the entire reason why, excuse me, is because of Terra-type fighting. A lot of mons that would otherwise be walled by Pawniard can just do, I'm Terra-type fighting now. I can just Terra Blast, and then you're dead. And there's not all that much that you can do besides trying to predict the Terra, use your own Terra. It's not fun. It's really hard to deal with. So that's what makes the number 1 so good, in addition to the fact that you naturally outpace Pawniard with his 19 speed. You can use a Scarf set, but that locks you into 1 move, and if you're up against the Wish Protect set, good luck trying to get some progress in. It's not going to happen. So, what else is making you really hard to deal with? Well, first and foremost, we have Zorua, and the reason why Zorua is really annoying is because Dark-type competition, it's also a Dark-type, and it kept knockoff, meaning that one of the biggest reasons why you liked it last generation is now on a slightly faster, and although it's got less of an attack stat, it's still fine because it removes the Eviolite, so it's better overall. So it's really hard to be able to deal with, like, well, this is really big competition, why not just run a Zorua, which has Illusion to be really sneaky, do some mind games on your opponent, still has Sucker Punch, has U-Turn to get out of bad matchups. For example, this Marionette would otherwise be able to wall Pawniard because it doesn't have knockoff. It can take its attacks really well, and you don't have access to Psycho Cut, which was removed from Gen 8, so there's that. So you can just U-turn out of the Marionette, go into Diglett, go into Toadschool, go into something else that can deal with this Marionette, whereas Pawniard just has to attack into it, hope and pray that your opponent doesn't switch, and that's it. So there's that. And this also runs Terra Blast Fighting, meaning that if you put your Pawniard and you're thinking like, oh, well, this is a Zorua, I can just deal with it, because, I mean, it's not going to be able to attack me very effectively. That's one of the reasons why it's been bad for so many years. No, it's just Terra Blast Fighting and you die. So there's that. Next up, we have Crabrawler, and Crabrawler is good because it outpaces Pawniard by 1 point, meaning that unless you're running a Scarf, you're not faster than Crabrawler, which can be really annoying to deal with. It's also got Stab, Drain Punch, plus Iron Fist to boost the Drain Punch. And what that all means is that you have a really good stab option to be able to hit Pawniard that also heals you. You can also use Bulk Up to become a bit of a late-game sweeper. In addition to, oh, well, what if I just switch to Terra-type Flying or Terra-type Ghost? Well, it still has options to be able to deal with you, such as Ice Punch and Thunder Punch. In addition to stuff like Crab Hammer, it's got a really deep move pool, surprisingly. But it can deal with it. Like, you cannot deal with a Crabrawler as a Pawniard, and Crabrawler has so many options to be able to deal with a Pawniard. It's pretty crazy. Next up, we have Mankey, which it's a 17-speed Scarfer, and the reason why that's important is that normally it would be okay-ish. It's like, oh, well, you know, it's a Mankey, it's doing other stuff, but it outpaces you even after a Scarf boost. So even if you're running Scarf Pawniard, you still have a really tough matchup versus Mankey. You do not want to see this on the enemy team. It's going to be really rough to deal with. Once again, it's also got U-turn, meaning it's it vies for the Scarfer slot, because why would you want to run Pawniard when it can just be a momentum sink, when Mankey can just, oh, well, I want to go to my Marionette so that way I can deal with this Mankey because it can resist close combat. Just U-turn out, go to Diglett, and then Marionette's gone. So there's that. You also has Earthquake and Ice Punch. Ice Punch is for the next target on this list, Toadschool, which can deal with it pretty well through a variety of factors. First and foremost, Spore causes the target to fall asleep, meaning that you can't use Sucker Punch on it. It'll always go last because of Mycelia Might, so even if it's faster than you, if it's running 17 speed, that means that you can't use your Spore turns up. So how sleep works is that you have 1 to 3 turns that you're asleep, and during that time, you get a chance to wake up. And if you get slept, so, for example, let's just remove that. So we have Shroomish. Shroomish also gets it. It's got a, like, weird speed stat. But let's just say I'm using Spore with this, and my opponent has something slower, such as Impidimp, which is not fast. So I run Spore on this. So if it spores the Impidimp, and Impidimp is slower, that means that Impidimp will burn a turn of sleep on the first turn that it would normally act. Meaning that it has a pretty good... it has better odds to wake up on the following turn, the turn after. Whereas with Toadschool Spore, it always goes last, meaning that regardless of what you click, you are going to have 1 turn that you're asleep, and it can be really hard to deal with. So there's that. You also have Earth Power, which is a really strong stab option that Toadschool can use to break over you on your less bulky special defense. It has knockoff, so it can remove your Scarf, it can remove your Eviolite, make you less bulky, and most importantly, it's got Rapid Spin. And what makes Rapid Spin really hard for you to deal with is if you're a Scarf set, and this is max speed Toad School. Let's just assume it's like, I don't know, minus defense or something. I don't know. It's really hard to find a nature on Toad School, but like, just saying that it's this, then after a Rapid Spin, it'll outpace you and be able to hit you with an Earth Power anyway. And it's still not locked into its moves. So there's that. It's going to be pretty rough. And then the final one that deserves a mention is Impidimp, because it's a dark type that you like having Pawniard in against because it blanks Parting Shot, meaning that Impidimp can't just switch out for free, and because of Prankster. But also it has Drain Punch, so even though you like running Brick Break to break through screens, it can be hard to make progress against, especially because it's also Terra-type Ghost, meaning that it can blank your Brick Break that would normally be able to break through this. So it's a pretty bad matchup, despite the fact that you really want to have it in. But what are you actually pretty good against? Because, you know, like, you're number 2. You're not, you know, the 20th down. What are you actually pretty good against that you can fight against pretty well? Ghost types. Ghastly, it does still have Terra-type fighting, but it's less important when it's got the defensive paper, 30 HP, 30 defense. It's not going to be able to take your hits very well, if at all. And you also outpace it with a Scarf set, so you can just bonk Ghastly and it'll likely die. You have Drifloon. Drifloon isn't very bulky on the physical side because it always likes running Unburden as opposed to Aftermath. Reason for that is doubling your speed means that you can do a lot of stuff really effectively. Fast Will-O-Wisp, fast Destiny Bond can remove things. It's really annoying to deal with. But because of Unburden and because of the lack of knockoff, you have to run Oranberry, so it can be really unreliable as a tech when it can't get too much HP back. So there's that. Next up we have Meowth. And Meowth, you're good at resisting because it's got Fake Out, Fent, U-Turn, Bite. It takes on Fake Outs really well, and then you can punish it switching in because Fake Out only works on the first turn that you're out. By setting up Stealth Rocks, by sending out a Thunder Wave into something that's coming in, all this sorts of stuff. You're also single-handedly responsible for making Shroodle unviable as a sweeper. It's relegated to support duties only, and that's because, despite the fact that it also has knockoff, it can't hit Pawniard at all without a Terra Blast fighting, and you don't really want to use your Terra Blast fighting on Shroodle when it's got such pitiful bulk as is. Even if it's got good speed, it's not going to be able to break over a lot of stuff. Finally, you actually have a pretty alright matchup versus Diglett. Not only does your Scarf set just sort of instantly kill the Diglett because it's not fast enough, you're able to take a hit with the Eviolite set because it doesn't have the Life Orb boost, and because of how bulky you are on the physical side. It's pretty crazy. So even though Diglett is your natural enemy, you can still deal with it. You also have Terra-type Flying to avoid the Earthquakes, so it's all okay. And then stuff you're not bad versus, we have Glimmet, and it likes setting Stealth Rock, Toxic Splash with Toxic Debris. But the important bit is Mudshot. Otherwise, when Glimmet's trying to use Sludge Bomb and Power Gem, it's going to do not very much damage. It's resisted. You resist Power Gem because of your Steel typing. You don't even take any damage from Sludge Bomb because of your Steel typing. So you want to use Mudshot, because that's the most powerful ground type move that you have. Like if I look up ground, all you have is Mudshot and Spikes. You have to use Mudshot. You also want Mudshot for the Glimmet Mirror. But the important part is that it has a 100% chance to lower the target speed by 1. As I mentioned before, you have Defiant as your ability, meaning that whenever you have a stat lowered, you get a sharp increase to your attack. So even if Glimmet wants to be able to deal with you, like, oh, I'll just Mudshot into it, I'll be able to deal a whole bunch of damage. You give it a Sword Stance boost, and you don't want that when it's already got Sucker Punch? Pawniard can really easily win games if it gets a +2 in attack. And speaking of +2 in attack, Surskit. Sticky Web is still around. It gets banned a lot It gets banned really easily every generation because it can be really hard to get rid of the Sticky Web. However, Pawniard is an exceedingly good check to Sticky Web because every time it lowers your speed on your switch-in, you get a +2 attack boost, meaning that they have to be really careful around it. It's not perfect because, you know, Terra-type fighting, all that jazz, but you still have a really good matchup versus it. You're also generally bulky. You get to deal with Magnemite and other Scarfers pretty well because not all of them are as fast as you, and even if you're not, you're always pretty bulky because of your typing as well as your stats, so you're going to take on a lot of stuff. all of Rain you're pretty good against. Weasel's just sort of the stand-in. Even though it's got Brick Break, it doesn't want to take any more damage than it has to, especially because it has Wave Crash as its main stab. I mean, it's good because it's 120 base power, but it has 33% recoil, and if you can knock it down a peg, because it thinks it's going to be able to take some hits well, nah. It hates priority, like there's no tomorrow. It's got 35 defense, 55 HP, that's not really all that good. So being able to deny them all of this free damage because they can just go fast and be like, haha, well I'm 38 speed because of how fast I am in the rain. Being able to do really heavy damage because you have Sucker Punch can really put a damper on Rain. Hee hee hee. You're also pretty good check to Nimble. Nimble is something you always have to really watch out for. But the reason why you're a good check is because you're neutral versus it, and you quadruple resist Sucker Punch. Nimble's good because of Tinted Lens, meaning that all not very effective attacks deal double damage, but because you're quadruple resisting, it's still resisted. So even if it wants to come in, use First Impression into you, well, you can also just resist the Sucker Punch afterwards, but First Impression doesn't deal enough damage, and then Nimble gets threatened out, and then you can set up Stealth Rocks, hit into the opposing team with some really hard moves. Pretty nice. Excuse me. And then the final thing I'm going to mention is Shellos, and you'll see why in a sec. But Shellos is a really bulky pawn. It's got 76 HP, a lot of defense, and a lot of special defense. And even if it's running something like Earth Power, that's going to hit you pretty hard, isn't it? Well, you say that. However, if we go to this game versus MK007 versus Xe, this is from Scarlet Violet World Cup Kickoff Tournament. This is from the semifinals. It's Xe versus MK007. However, Pawniard is exceedingly good here. So if we just see, oh, well, switching into a Crunch, gets the defense drop, attack boost. So Crunch, as I mentioned before, it can drop, and you can take it really well. So despite the fact that you're doing something very passive, while I'm switching in my other Mon to take this hit, you're still getting a lot of progress off of it. At which point, the opponent goes limit, so that we can take the Sucker Punch, but that's all okay. Then you set up Stealth Rock. You still have utility even after you're set up, technically. Because even if your opponent's like, oh, well, you know, I want to be able to deal with this through, you know, like some passive means. I'll be able to set up rocks, get some other passive stuff done. Oh, well, you know, I can do that too. I can also just set up Stealth Rock. It's all okay. But then, yeah, just Sucker Punch so that way it's not outsped. Then it kills the Glimmet. And then Shellos comes in. You're thinking, oh, well, you know, this can never break over Shellos. Shellos is really bulky. Going back to it, it's got 25 HP, 14 defense. It's always going to have Eviolite. How are you going to break over this? The simple answer is with Brute Force. Brute Force. Ugh. Excuse me. But despite the fact that Shellos is absurdly bulky, you're still breaking through it with Brick Breaks, and you can still take Earth Power because of how naturally bulky you are. And even though you're at 1 HP, it doesn't matter because your Sucker Punches, your Brick Breaks, they all remain the same amount of power. It's still so good. Pawniard is number 2, but that does not mean that it should be disregarded. It is a wonderful Pokemon that you should use pretty often because of its unique traits, unique speed tier, and really high power. Thank you all very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you could like, share, and subscribe, that would be absolutely wonderful. I'll see you later, and have a good day.